Hare Krishna. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura Ki Jaya. All glories to Ayendra Prabhu. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. And all glories to all the previous acharyas, back to Lord Brahma and Lord Sri Krishna. All glories to Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, and their spreading of the holy names throughout the world. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. Bhaktisiddhanta approves. That's how I'm going to start off tonight. This one statement says it all. Hare Krishna. So, since our last presentation, welcome Robin. Thank you for joining us. Hare Krishna. Since our last presentation, some very interesting things have happened. And I will explain this later on in the video regarding Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura and his relationship with us, with myself in particular, and with you, each individually in particular also. Very interesting things, actually, I did not expect. So this will be very interesting. So to begin, let us rewind back what we were discussing earlier in the intro to this topic. This topic today is dealing with the seventh false ideology, Bhaktisiddhanta's mission and his devotional war against Bhakti, mixed with the deep darkness of sexual Tantra. Yes, Robin, obeisances have been made. So, like we were saying before, just like now what's happening in the world at large, the Vaishnava world at large, this is what was happening during Bhaktisiddhanta's time also. So what had happened was there was a version of Bhakti, of actual devotion to Krishna, that was mixed with sexual Tantra, meat eating, intoxication, etc. And this had become the accepted standard, the accepted norm in the world by the time Bhaktisiddhanta appeared. And this is one of the reasons why, in fact, he actually appeared and was sent, as you well know. Now, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, this is mentioned in the well-known, that he in Goloka Vrindavana is Nayani Manjari, or Nayana Manjari. Now, for anyone who doesn't know who the Manjaris are the younger gopis. They're the ones who are basically, I guess in modern materialistic terms, you could say, to give you a rough understanding of this, would be the prepubescent or just having hit puberty time frame individuals. So the term Manjari is specifically referring to more so the age and also the function of these particular gopis of Goloka Vrindavana. So he is Nayani Manjari, or Nayana Manjari, however you would like to spell that, and in Goloka Vrindavana, and his mood, I should say internally her mood in Goloka Vrindavana, is that of protecting the sanctity, the factual sanctity, and the glories of the gopis themselves in their relationship with Krishna and their actual position. So you'll notice this when he manifests also externally, that he is emphasizing this the entirety of his devotional life, of his pastimes here. So if anyone doesn't know about what these things are, tonight is the night to get well informed of what these are factually. So what is Bhakti mixed with the darkness of sexual Tantra? What is this exactly? What are the beliefs, the teachings? What's the actual philosophical ideas here? So rewind back to previous ages, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, etc. Now, in this one sacrifice called the horse sacrifice, there are many who claim and many who insist on the fact that this involved the horse that was about to be sacrificed having physical intercourse with the wife of the king, who is performing the horse sacrifice before the horse was slaughtered. And also, many people are also claiming that the king himself engaged in intercourse with a female horse also during this performance. Now, whether these things actually took place physically, in terms of physical intercourse with horses or not, as far as I understand, is not 100% determined one way or the other if this actually physically took place or these are metaphorical references spoken during the sacrifice or not. It is yet to be 100% determined from what I have seen. But we need to understand, in either case, whether the physical intercourse took place or not, the Ashvamedha horse sacrifices, once again, were only performable in those previous ages because the lust as we understand it today, the way lust operates in our hearts and minds in Kali Yuga, did not affect people in the same way in previous ages that lust does today. So therefore, those types of sacrifices, even if those things were to take place in them, were doable and engageable by people who had a consciousness that was on a deeper level beyond what we currently are able to process in terms of the way we understand lust today and the way lust operates currently, which is why this Ashvamedha sacrifice is one of the things forbidden in the current day and age of Kali Yuga, along with many other things. So many of the things which are forbidden, pretty much everything that is forbidden, has to do directly with intercourse to one degree or another. And this is especially so for Kali Yuga, these things being forbidden, because these activities, if engaged in Kali Yuga, will simply befool the mind of the individual engaging in them and lead them further and further into lustful, depraved activities more and more. So there were some people claiming at the time that these things were still valid and these types of sacrifices should still be going on. So yes, people were still in various instances having sex with animals, etc., like this in the name of doing these things. That's one aspect of the bhakti mixed with the sexual tantra. Another aspect of this has to do with people engaging in intoxication in the name of bhakti. So drinking alcohol, off and on as an activity that's engaged in, considered normal. You know, drinking coffee, tea, etc. Meat eating, of course, of eating the meat of these animals who were sacrificed in these sacrifices, etc. And also, of course, gambling as well, gambling off and on. All these things were being done as basically just kind of an accepted norm standard amongst so-called Vaishnavas throughout India to various degrees, to various capacities one way or the other. And there was not any solid actual preaching or individuals engaged against these types of activities. Welcome, Nick. And you said depressants don't work well for devotional purposes. That is correct, yes. So all these activities that were being engaged in were deviant activities, factually, but they were being passed off as bhakti or devotion by these people with using the Vedas which applied to activities of previous ages as their justification. And the common ground amongst all these individuals, they were not preaching correctly and did not understand what Harinama Sankirtana actually is and what's actually taking place during Harinama Sankirtana. And once again, these same people, just like we're running into today, these same individuals thought and assumed wrongly that Harinama Sankirtana was simply the process for this age of Kali Yuga. Basically just a primitive process, the most basic thing, because that's all people are qualified for, etc. When that's actually not the case at all. There's far more to Harinama Sankirtana than that, which is one of the other reasons Bhaktisiddhanta appeared, to clarify these points to people. So when Bhaktisiddhanta appeared, he was known to have had his umbilical cord wrapped around his chest in the shape of a sacred thread. So those who are initiated as Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, they are given a sacred thread that goes across the chest like this diagonally. Now, his umbilical cord was in that shape, and it was said that he had this mark across his body his entire life, a very faint mark, of a Brahmana thread in his case, because his case being Brahmana Varna. So his when he appeared like this is Krishna's indication to us that, hey, this individual actually, even prior to and without formal initiation, is already qualified to preach the absolute truth, and this individual has been sent for this purpose. So he was specifically sent as the son of Bhaktivinoda Thakura, because Bhaktivinoda Thakura was the one taking care of Jagannath Puri at this time, and he was taking Jagannath Puri leadership very seriously, and management, etc., and taking it back from all these pseudo-devotional sects as well. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself was adamantly going against the corruptions and deviations that were going on. But then when Bhaktisiddhanta appeared, he took it many, many steps further in this regards, even more so than Bhaktivinoda Thakur, specifically in regards to cracking down on all forms of deviation related to devotional service, etc. So the guys that he was speaking against, of course, as you all know, the common ground factor that they all had going for them was that they all wanted to engage in sex and sense gratification, and they still wanted to be gurus and pass that off as bhakti and be allowed to, and they wanted scriptural justification in this regards. So what they would do is they would connive and concoct and twist the meanings of scriptural words to suit their sensual pleasure agendas and pass that off as devotional activity. Now, this is very interesting to note, actually, in this regards. Devotion to Lord Sankarshana, so devotion to Lord Anantadeva, so Balarama's expansion in the form of the thousand-headed serpent, or I should say that the serpent that has, technically speaking, unlimited numbers of heads, but who dwells at the bottom of this universe also. In his service, there are many nagas, so half-human, half-serpent people who can take the form of a serpent, a human, or a mix between a serpent and a human. This race and this species, many of them are actually serving, as we speak right now, Lord Ananta in the lower planets like this. Now, the nagas are known for being very much in the mode of tamas, in most cases, so the mode of darkness. The mode of darkness, of course, being a deeper, more specific reference than only ignorance, of course, ignorance being a branch-off aspect of that mode of darkness, but not the original initial source and cause behind the darkness. So in other words, they're factually engaging in devotion to Krishna in his expanded form, but in a way that will keep them specifically serving Lord Ananta Shesha, and also in the process, being that species, being members of that group, will also be engaging in various degrees of intoxication, mediating illicit sex, and gambling, these types of things, and actually still be engaging in Krishna service. So, yes, a devotee can technically engage in these things and still engage in Krishna service in that particular way, but Bhaktisiddhanta's point was that if one wants to actually make it out of the material world altogether, and actually make it to Goloka Vrindavana specifically, in the mood of the gopis, in this case, the devotee must actually give up all these illicit activities before they leave their body, to facilitate and assist with their actual full surrender of consciousness before leaving the body. So this is what Bhaktisiddhanta came to specify and to clarify to the world. So, in other words, if one is a devotee and they want to keep engaging in these activities, and they insist on this, it really is best, actually, to shift the individual's devotion, if that is their full focus and intent, to devotion to Ananta Shesha, Balarama's expansion, serpentine expansion. If one is insisted on engaging in mode of darkness and mode of passion activities like that, your best option that will actually keep you in connection with Krishna in his expanded form like that is to worship Krishna in that particular way, with Ananta Shesha and his direct service as your central main focus, actually. And so this is what's very important for devotees. But what was going on with these individuals at the time was that they were trying to pass off that Gopi Bhava and like Parakya Rasa, so the paramour consciousness and relationship, and these relationships in Goloka, they were trying to pass off that these activities could also involve an individual still engaging in illicit sex, meat, intoxication, gambling, etc. And Bhaktisiddhanta was like, no, that's not how it works. you saying you people absolutely do not understand. This is these topics are far beyond the grasp of a lustful consciousness or a lustful heart and mind to understand at all. So he was successful in this, and obviously they wanted him dead because he was preaching this, and he made the impact that was needed to make. But of course, once again, as soon as Bhaktisiddhanta left his body, left the planet, pretty much every one of his disciples, almost all of them, deviated from his teachings once again, both philosophically and behaviorally. And Srila Prabhupada, was the only one, or one of the only ones, to actually maintain the legitimate teachings and the actual mission of Bhaktisiddhanta into this current age. And then once again, of course, the same thing happened with Prabhupada as well. So where Ayendra Prabhu carried the torch from Prabhupada, the accurate teachings that he wanted to spread, whereas practically no one else actually maintained them at all. And the cycle continues. So Ayendra Prabhu's actual teachings and what he actually was teaching about Krishna consciousness is now, it's up to all of us to maintain this accurate line of devotional truth. What he taught about Harinama Sankirtana, what is actually taking place, and maintaining the standards that Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura set forth regarding these realizations of these deep transcendental topics. Now, it's very important to understand this, and not misunderstand this point. The four regulative principles are specifically being followed 100% strictly. These four regulative principles are specifically for those who are Brahmana Varna by inclination and nature. Okay? So if one is Kshatriya inclined by nature, Vaishya inclined by nature, or Shudra inclined by nature, you will not be able to strictly follow the no illicit sex principle 100% as one of those other three Varnas, unless you are already a pure devotee. Okay? Please remember this. If one is a genuine Brahmana, they may actually be able to follow the four regulative principles strictly, 100%, if they are actually Brahmana Varna, okay? Without yet necessarily being a fully pure devotee in practice and consciousness. So the four regulative vows, in terms of absolutely no illicit sex, no meat eating, no intoxication, and gambling, these are specifically for Brahmana Varna inclined individuals, because quite simply speaking, those who are assigned Kshatriya Varna activities, Vaishya activities, Shudra activities, due to the nature of what they're assigned to do, practically speaking, they actually cannot follow these four regulative principles. So, for example, Kshatriyas, they're required to practice hunting. And what this entails is to practice proficiency with a bow and arrow against actual living targets and get accustomed to the process of innocent blood being shed. You have to be psychologically accustomed to this, seeing this, and so you become psychologically numb and immune to the effects of this. As a Kshatriya, this is a requirement, actually. So it's literally impossible for a Kshatriya not to actually hunt animals and do things like this if they're fulfilling their functions as Kshatriya Varna. It's also not possible for a Kshatriya not to fully abstain from gambling, because Kshatriyas are required to accept challenges to gambling, to board gaming, etc. that has to do with warfare and all these types of things. And as a Kshatriya, you're required to accept these challenges. So, once again, Kshatriyas cannot strictly observe the no gambling principle either, due to this fact. In illicit sex, Kshatriyas are required to accept requests from females to have intercourse with them, to give them children, to become their wives, etc. like this. And that, once again, is why Kshatriyas cannot observe that principle. With the intoxication principle, Kshatriyas are allowed to engage in certain amounts of intoxication for political purposes and for conquest-related purposes, other kingdoms, interactions with other people, etc. So the idea is with the other three Varnas, to the best of our ability, or to the best of their ability, I should say, and I'll explain what I mean by this in a minute, is to observe the four regulative principles as much as possible as one of these four varnas, but never making the vow to follow the four regulative principles strictly if you are Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra inclined. Okay, so so the big issue that has been happening, and that's caused the biggest amount of confusion, is people genuinely inclined towards the other three varnas have been, many of them have been getting initiated as brahmanas. Okay, so when you're making the vow to follow the four regs strictly 100%, you're being initiated actually as a brahmana, factually, because you simply cannot engage in the activities of the other three varnas if you're making those four vows. You simply cannot do it. And you will notice, if your inclinations are towards the other three varna activities, you will not actually be able to strictly follow the no illicit sex principle. You will not be able to do it unless you're already a pure devotee. It won't happen. And this actually has much more to do with that being, having to do with your psychophysical condition, more so than your lack of purity or anything of that sort, basically. So yes, there's a lack of purity and factor involved, but it has more so to do with the varna, the psychophysical construction. Whereas, yes, my pleasure, Nick. I hope you find this very helpful and informative and uplifting. So, so in my position, my natural inclination has always been towards Kshatriya activities, but in the specific way that involves me teaching Kshatriyas the arts. So teaching Kshatriyas how to hunt, how to practice archery correctly, teaching them how to engage in the combat arts, how to kill effectively in close combat, teaching them how to lead on a large scale, how to organize military formations, etc. These have always been my inclinations and my area of interest, combined with my fixation on teaching scriptural knowledge and in-depth information about Shastra. Welcome, Mira. Thank you for joining us. So, in the situation that will gradually be forming among us with our daily Harinama Sankirtana activities worldwide, is that everyone will start filling in their natural roles, their natural inclinations. It will be a semblance of Varnashrama to begin with. So my role and function will be functioning as best as I can in the quote-unquote Brahmana role as a teacher of Kshatriyas. So unlike in most cases where an individual is engaged in Brahmana activities, not specifically teaching Kshatriyas how to kill, how to hunt, etc., in those cases, those individuals will, of course, naturally not be teaching hunting, not be teaching these types of things, etc. Whereas in my position, I'm practically speaking required to teach these types of things along these lines. Even though my natural inclination is Brahmana inclination, my speciality in terms of the subject matter I'm interested in teaching and engaging in is the combat arts. So just like Dronacharya and Bhishmadeva were inclined in this similar manner, and were very good at this, my inclination is very similar to theirs in this regards. So even though they were actually Brahmana Varna by inclination, naturally, they specialized in Kshatriya training. So therefore they themselves also engaged in Kshatriya activities, so the practice of hunting, battlefield engagements, etc., conquest, warfare. And when they were on the battlefield fighting, they were treated and interacted with as Kshatriyas and not as Brahmanas, because that is what they specialize in. And it's understood shastrically that if someone's on the battlefield fighting against you in armor with weapons, etc., they are to be interacted with as if they were a Kshatriya, basically, instead of as if they were a different Varna, basically. So that's even if they're Brahmanas or Vaishyas, Shudras, whatever. So yes, so cutting out meat, the idea is, and even in the cases of Maharaja Yudhishthira and the Pandavas, they were practicing hunting, but except for Bhimadeva among them, all the other Pandavas, they were not eating the meat. They were actually practicing hunting, but not eating the meat. They were doing their best to actually use the skins, etc., to make things out of as well, and pass them on to the other Varnas for use in different capacities, for making armor, drums, all these types of things like that. For protecting the forests where the Brahmanas dwelled from the dangerous animals, so many other things like this, and protecting their skill in general. Right, and so cutting out meat entirely is a very good idea, and it's recommended for Kshatriyas if you're able to do so. But the point is, if one is Kshatriya Varna, you're allowed to eat meat if it's hunted by you directly, and or if the meat is offered in the sacrificial fire offerings like this. So Kshatriyas are allowed to do so, but they are not recommended to do so. Just like Kshatriyas are allowed to break the other three principles, but it's still not recommended. If they can avoid it as much as possible, that is more ideal, basically. So Maharaja Yudhisthira is a great example of this, pure devotee, but you'll notice in the scriptures he specifically was very hooked on the process of gambling. Okay, and this was his, ultimately this was Krishna's arrangement for him, but his engagement in gambling as Kshatriya Varna was actually scripturally authorized and also authorized by Krishna as a central principle, even though throughout the Shastra people got on him about it, because in every other area, a facet of life, he was known for being spotless. But he had this one quote-unquote vice, I guess you could say, with the gambling thing. And but you'll notice he was never actually accused of anything in terms of directly being involved in gambling as the gambling itself being something wrong. It was his addiction to it and his obsession with the gambling that basically was his vice, okay, that people were calling him out on. But it wasn't the gambling itself that he was actually being told was an irreligious principle. Because for Kshatriya Varna individuals, it is actually a religious principle to accept gambling challenges, just like it's a principle to accept dueling challenges. So, very interesting with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura. His father, so Thakura has to do with, at the end of a name, has to do with Kshatriya lineages in terms of like family lineages, etc. Irregardless of what Varna the individuals within that actually end up being, that's kind of what that title indicates at the end. So technically speaking, his surroundings, the surroundings he was born in was very much is very much a background of a Kshatriya lineage consciousness. So Bhaktivinoda Thakura, of course, you saw that he was engaged in various types of administrative Kshatriya type activities. Okay, and even though his actual Varna was naturally, externally speaking, Brahmana. Now, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura clarified this for us. That yes, Robin, that is a good point. You say sometimes it's the idea of Maya rather than the actual reality of Maya that is so enticing and distracting. Correct. So, and I'll definitely touch on that some more as we go along. That exact word. So in essence, basically, when Bhaktisiddhanta appeared, he could have chosen either way and been just fine in either capacity, functioning as a Kshatriya or as Brahmana. Now, he also clarified in his book, Brahmana and Vaishnava, Bhaktisiddhanta wrote this in his book, that we should always identify devotees according to them being Vaishnavas, Krishnavas, devotees to Radha and Krishna, or Lakshmi and Vishnu. So we should always classify them according to this devotion, which is transcendental to the Varnashrama system. But at the same time, we can acknowledge people's external activities for what they are in terms of an occupational function. Whereas, even though Vaishnavas are above this, and we should identify them as Vaishnavas, not according to an external Varna, we can still recognize for organizational purposes, and it's a very good idea to do so, what people's external activities are as Vaishnavas, but not identify them according to those activities. So this is the point Bhaktisiddhanta was making. So we shouldn't consider someone, okay, he's a Brahmana Vaishnava, he's a Kshatriya Vaishnava, etc. No, you consider them Vaishnavas, and then the specifically, which is even transcendental to the Brahmana classification, and then the Varnashrama engagement that they may be engaged in, maybe any number of the four, was the point. So it's not that you ignore the Varnashrama setup, it's just that you don't identify anyone according to that, if they're a devotee of Krishna. Okay. So, yes, what you're saying very much so is, so the word Maya has the two meanings. Okay? So the first meaning to the word Maya is affection. and that is actually the main predominant central meaning. The secondary definition of Maya means that which is not. Okay, so by focusing on the first definition of Maya, affection, this has to do with Radha and Krishna's affection towards every living entity, the affection of Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, this intimate affection, and the affection of the pure devotees. This is what Maya actually means. So this is what is being referred to when we say Maya. Maya is this affection. But if one continues to identify the term Maya according to the secondary definition, that which is not, they will perceive things in different ways regarding transcendental topics, their relationships with devotees, and that which is externally observable. So it's very important to cultivate the internal understanding of Maya as affection, transcendental affection. Okay? So and the reason this is important actually is because the inhabitants of Vrindavana are known for being in the deepest type of yoga Maya, and we've discussed this before, that it's not because they're actually in illusion at all. It's because Krishna's function in intimacy with the gopis is actually his deeper function, his truer self, his deeper self, beyond him being God. And that is the actual truth. In fact, that is actually more true than him being God. His God function being his secondary function to his Krishna function. Okay? Which is why he's called in the Bhagavatam, when he's being referred to as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Vasudeva, the son, Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva. Okay, so this is very important to remember, because this way we can understand the real meaning of Maya in relationship to the inhabitants of Vrindavana. It means that they understand Krishna on a deeper level than those who see Krishna as God first and foremost, and then secondarily as intimately involved with them. Okay, whereas those who see Krishna as God first and foremost, and then secondarily intimate with them as a secondary function of Krishna, they see the inhabitants of Vrindavana as being in illusion regarding that which is not, because they believe Krishna as God is the highest thing. Okay, and because they believe this about Krishna, they therefore assume that the inhabitants of Vrindavana are in a consciousness where they don't know that Krishna is God, when the reality is they actually know more and deeper about Krishna than him being God. That's actually the reality of it. So they know who Krishna is beyond him being God, on a deeper level. That's the truth. And they understand deeply and inherently that Krishna's God function is secondary to his primary function. The inhabitants of Vrindavana understand this clearly. Whereas the inhabitants of Dvaraka and Mathura, they think that Krishna is God first and foremost, and then his intimacy with the individuals is legitimate, but it's secondary to him being God. That's how they see it. So, because they focus on somewhat the secondary definition of Maya. That's why. So, it's very interesting. And Bhaktisiddhanta also, yes, he came and clarified all these various points as well. So you'll see this in his writings. Now, the way Bhaktisiddhanta writes, it's very interesting. Many people are intimidated to read from Bhaktisiddhanta's writings simply because his wording is really, really elaborate, like really, really detailed in terms of... So he was writing especially to convince the really high, deeply intellectual people of society, and that was his... Of course, he was writing for everyone's benefit, but that was his main target on audience. So like super, super scholarly people, hyper intellectuals, etc. These are the types of people he was writing his stuff for, and you'll see this in the way he writes too. It's his writings are very much catered to people who are extremely well read in terms of definitions of so many different words, concepts, etc. Things like this. Whereas the way Prabhupada presented things, his wording was worded for people of all different levels. So people who aren't like super hyper intellectuals, and also for people who are hyper intellectual as well. Whereas Bhaktisiddhanta's emphasis was more on specifically the intellectual side. Now, every acharya, when they appear, they reveal the information in a very unique fashion. None of them actually reveal the information exactly as it was revealed before. So in the Bhagavatam, in the first few verses, you'll see this actually in Prabhupada's purports, that Shukadeva Goswami being the parrot, it doesn't mean actually that he's parroting off like a robot exactly what he was told about Krishna. What that means is parrots are known for specifically making mangoes, like fruit, more relishable once they touch them with their beaks and stuff like this. So that is actually what's being referred to also by Shukadeva Goswami being the parrot, it means that he's taking the truth, repeating the accurate information, and actually purifying that information in a way that is more relishable to the audience, okay? But maintaining the same truth. Because many may assume that Shukadeva is simply just repeating only and not actually putting his own original understanding on things into it. Whereas his individually unique understanding of things into this, which he actually is doing so when he speaks the Bhagavatam. He is putting his unique understanding into this, and this is actually the duty of every acharya. It is to maintain the exact same message, the same correct truth, information, and then present the same information in a way that is more relishable to both themselves and the audience. That is always a new audience. So you'll notice as history goes on, there's always different audiences. So this is what's being referred to in Scripture as the time, place, and circumstance stuff. So the audience we have today for Krishna conscious topics is a completely different audience of different psychophysical construction, consciousness, etc., different egregores, different collective consciousness movements that are going around amongst everyone, different from the way they were in the early 30s, 20s, early 1900s, distinct also from when Prabhupada appeared during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And this will change again. So 50 years down the road from now, we're going to be dealing with a different situation of mass consciousness conditioning. So the thing is, people are conditioned in different ways, in slightly different ways as the ages progress and go on. So therefore, the way devotional service must be revealed to them, the message needs to be maintained, but in a way that they can actually appreciate and grasp and understand things. So you'll notice in our discussions here, we're always very much emphasizing the importance of individual uniqueness and individuality, okay? And this being the most important facet of devotional service, or one of the most important facets of devotional service, clarifying that Jivatma means infinitely unique, and all sorts of things like this. Whereas you'll notice Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta, they mentioned this, but they didn't specifically emphasize this point so much, simply for the reason that the understanding of the individuals at the time that they were talking to were needing and looking for and internally feeling a very deep urge for a message that had to do with the strong emphasis on how they at that time processed what humility was, what surrender is, all these types of things. Now we're dealing with the generation of people and a consciousness construct, mass consciousness construct of individuals who are completely immersed in lustful thinking and activities 24/7, who are completely surrounded by the idea and the need to actually feel validation on a deep level and know that this is true, and so many other things like this. So whereas no longer can people be explained in the same exact way as before in most cases currently, simply for the fact that people do not process the same information the way that they would have during that time. So you can have the same information but delivered in a way that actually attracts individuals in a modern setting, basically, or a current setting versus a setting that we experienced before. Okay, so you're mentioning so far I've only worshipped in isolation, so I have very little knowledge on everything specific. So, good. It's good that you're here because we're going to go into this a lot more now. This is very interesting. So what I did was I prayed to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura about this point very deeply, actually, because as you well know, all of you know, I present often encoded music videos, which are proven and found to be directly encoded by the Supreme Lord himself, by Radha and Krishna themselves, by Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, etc., for the benefit of the entire world and to inspire the devotees in Harinama Sankirtana, which is why they put these various encodings in certain music that is accessible to the public. Now, this topic I present is a topic that you can see. I mean, you'll look into it and you'll be able to see the proof also yourself. It's not difficult to see these things. But the point being was my relationship with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura is always one of where he has very deep affection for me and for each of you as well. And so he was known for being very fiery externally, but he was very kind and gentle to the individuals who understood his purpose and why he behaved that way. Okay, so he was fiery against devotees being misled. He was fiery against people trying to justify lustful activities in the name of Gopi Bhav, etc. All these types of things was what he was opposed to and roaring against, externally speaking. So in my previous video, I presented that I was practically certain that on the external level at least, so in a public setting, he would openly speak against many of the things that I'm doing. But on a private level, with me personally one-on-one, he actually approves. And this is what I was praying to him, does he actually approve what I'm doing in regarding to this stuff that I do, with like the encoding, with the all this stuff, because the stuff is real, it's there, but once again, there are many things that are real and are there in the world that are taking place, but still are not actually fit or proper for presenting to the public. And so this is what I was wanting to know about him, whether it's better that I just, or what I wanted to know from him, okay? Is it better that I just keep this stuff to myself, and I'm aware of it myself, and don't present it publicly, so as not to mislead people with erroneous ideologies, etc.? And I make a point to clarify so many things in the videos I present, all the same, but all the same. Many people could use this stuff I present and try to misuse it in various ways, things like this, or misunderstand the topic, etc. So sure enough, I was praying to him during the night, praying to Nityananda, Chaitanya, Radha, and Krishna, all of them about this thing. And sure enough, that was what happened. Was there was a sensation of relaxation that overcame me. It was a sensation of infinitely very deep approval, actually, on a one-on-one personal level. And so pretty much that entire day I just rested, and because I was so relaxed internally. The only way I can describe this is it was Bhaktisiddhanta's mercy giving me relief and peace of mind, knowing that I'm doing the right thing and he's happy with what I'm doing, actually. Whereas even if in a public setting, however, because the way he preached and what his mission was, he would speak publicly overall in general against this type of thing, but privately with me, he would actually approve. So this is what he revealed to me, and I found this very fascinating, actually. So I'm mentioning this to you all now as his answer to my prayer. So when I say Bhaktisiddhanta approves, I'm referring to the fact that he's actually approving, much to my surprise, actually, what I'm doing. And he's confirmed this in many, many ways over. In fact, I've prayed to Bhaktisiddhanta many times in the past, and every time I've done so, he's actually fulfilled desires that had never been fulfilled before. So temporal desires, lustful desires, and at the same time renounces me from those same desires. And this has been the result of praying to Bhaktisiddhanta over and over. So literally, you're praying to Nayani Manjari in Goloka, and Bhaktisiddhanta in Chaitanya Lila. So please understand that Bhaktisiddhanta is Radha and Krishna's eternal associate. So you're not just praying to or interacting with some ordinary individual or just some devotee who's become purified of this. No, you're actually interacting with an eternal associate of the Lordship. So therefore, he literally has a unique form of potency which correlates with the actual potency of Radha and Krishna with you. Specifically in regards to mercy and understanding and things like this. So, and Nick Franzwa, yes, that's very important to look into. You're mentioning your attraction to Lakshmi Devi, etc. That's a very strong indication, actually, that you may very well have that inclination towards residence in Vaikuntha and or Mathura or Dvaraka with one of Sri Radha's expansions. So it's always important to pay attention to how you're actually attracted. And that will remain no matter what. So we've explained before how Vaikuntha and all these other places, there are various forms of transcendental conditioning, which they're eternally there to facilitate large numbers of living entities who want to interact with Krishna in a specific type of way. Okay, so Krishna eternally facilitates these functions, whereas every living entity's eternal deepest function is in Goloka Vrindavana, but there are many living entities that prefer to remain in other realms, not specifically in Vrindavana, simply because they have a preference to serve Krishna in a certain way, and they find joy in that. And Krishna facilitates that. So there's no question of anything being right or wrong when it comes to actual, natural, spontaneous devotional affection towards Radha and Krishna, expanded as Lakshmi and Vishnu. It's just because that has to do with your eternal Svarupa, your eternal form. So, Nick, if you have not seen a lot of this other topics before, we've gone really in depth on a lot of different things in previous presentations. So you can go to YouTube and look out Kamadeva Dasa, all the videos there. I posted them all there as well in a very numbered, laid out format, where we go over a lot of different things like this. So, so in essence, understand that your natural heart's inclinations towards serving Radha and Krishna a certain way are genuine and real, but it's very important to cultivate those in a way that inspires you in the practice of celibacy, and in a way that inspires you to follow the four regs, and more so than anything else, in a way that inspires you to chant Harinama Sankirtana every day. So, as we discussed before, Harinama Sankirtana, going out and loudly, vocally chanting the holy names, you can even do so just out in your car or even at home or whatever, if you need to. But the point is vocally, loudly chanting the holy names and singing and dancing to the holy names. And then doing this in public is the most ideal situation that we want to be engaged in, because that is actually the eternal function of the Jivatma. Harinama Sankirtana is not the process of this age to get back to Goloka. It's inclusive of that, of course, naturally. But Harinama Sankirtana literally is your eternal function in Goloka, Vrindavana, which is giving love of Radha and Krishna to others, which is the source of the living entities remaining in the transcendental realm, actually. So, so Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, he was very strong on this point here about the importance of daily Harinama Sankirtana, the importance of preaching, the importance of broadcasting the holy names as the source and means by which the individual is able to maintain brahmacharya celibacy, genuinely so, in this world. Because you'll notice that all the isolated stuff we do in devotional service, that will especially incline us to engage in more masturbation, more pornography, more illicit sex, whatever. Anything along those lines will be increased and encouraged more, specifically because we're focusing on engaging in devotion in private, and actually not for other reasons. So we're afflicted with more lust because we're not actually engaging in spreading the holy names the way we could be, and that is actually what causes the reaction to be afflicted by personal lust, etc. Because you're trying to use Lakshmi and Vishnu for your own sexual pleasure, and or Radha and Krishna for your own sexual pleasure, will be the cause of you indulging in activities which involve your own sexual pleasure. It's very simple, actually, to understand. But giving love to Radha and Krishna, giving love to Lakshmi and Vishnu, involves giving information about them and love about them to others. And that is the essence of us individually being able to maintain celibacy ourselves and be inspired in that direction. And even with that, because the lust is so thick, you'll notice it's still difficult and challenging, even when you're doing those things, but not as challenging and not as difficult. But the point is, you have to start somewhere, and you have to actually engage in the original function of yourself as a living being, which is broadcasting Krishna's glories throughout the world, wherever you're at, whoever you interact with. That's the key. So vocally chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Now, related to today's situation, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura is very much alive and active among us because he's Krishna's eternal associate. Goloka being everywhere, him also being everywhere, present, just right next to Radha and Krishna and their associates, along with Prabhupada, Nityananda also, who's Balarama, Ananga Manjari. All of them are eternally ever present everywhere around us at all times. So Bhaktisiddhanta's mission is continuing on, and in the form of his accurate original teachings being maintained and spread by all of us. So the greatest service we can do to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura is maintaining the truth of what he taught about the glories of the forms of Radha and Krishna, their holy names, the glories of Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, and the truth of the mood of Vrindavana, and promoting this throughout the world, so that people are not misled and not led astray into various ideologies and things like this. And Nick Franzwa, you're saying a man named Lon Milo Duquette described Bhakti as falling in love with God in a form which is all forms. That specific individual, I'm not exactly 100% familiar with who that is, but yes, Bhakti is falling in love with Krishna specifically, actually, in his original eternal form, his deepest, most intimate form, and then that extends to Krishna's expanded forms, such as, of course, Vishnu, Nrsimhadeva, etc. These various forms like this. But Bhakti, and we covered this before, Bhakti specifically has to do with actual devotion okay, which is transcendent to intellectual information and knowledge, and also transcendent to karma, so activities for results. That includes the result of wanting to get back to Goloka Vrindavana with the consciousness of going back somewhere. So Goloka Vrindavana is everywhere, and this is why the pure devotees don't pray to actually get out of the cycle of birth and death. They see birth after birth because they're already in Goloka. So very important points to remember. Whereas those still having some karmic ideology towards bhakti or whatever, they'll pray to go back to Goloka Vrindavana first, and then they'll develop that consciousness of birth after birth, serving Krishna, etc. No longer having the desire to go back to Goloka because they'll be there, actually. So you said Lana's a magician in the Thelamite path. Okay, I see. Well, this is very important too, because there are 7 main ideological false ideological ideas, which are pseudo-devotional ideologies, basically, which we're, in the years to come, we're going to be fighting against them and exposing every one of them wherever they arise. Now, there are many different false ideologies, but they all fall within the 7-fold, pretty much every case, in the vast majority of every case. They almost fit one of these things, because the number 7 has to do with information and also water. So the flow of things, okay, the flow of information, mass communication. This is what the number actually has to do with in so many ways, which is why there's 7 oceans surrounding this part of Jambudvipa, etc. And Robin Cloud, you're saying you made the distinction of birth after birth rather than birth after death. What does that mean? What that means is there basically there is somewhat of a distinction. Yes, that's actually a very good point. So the pure devotees, they pray, Lord, I want to serve you birth after birth, and they don't specifically say birth after death and then birth again. They just say birth after birth, which is very interesting, because the one absorbed in the process of pure devotion to Radha and Krishna, they don't actually experience dying. This is very significant, actually. So one who isn't absorbed in pure devotional service to Radha and Krishna, they will actually experience dying. But the pure devotees don't experience dying at all. They're actually completely absorbed in Goloka pastimes and activities from body to body the whole time. So whereas in the case of a conditioned soul, when they leave the body, they actually experience the death process, which is all these thoughts from your life flooding into your mind and then you shifting into the next body, etc. Pure devotees don't experience it that way. So that's actually a very good point, and in fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because no one to date has actually brought that particular point up that I know of. Most people just take it for face value that birth after birth, they're talking about, okay, birth, death, and then rebirth again. But what you're saying is actually a very good point, an extremely good point. Why? Because everything is specific. There's a reason why everything is done amongst devotees and in devotional service. So even that wording is also very specific. So now everybody knows what that wording is referring to. It's referring to the pure devotees not experiencing death at all. They may experience the birth process, but they don't experience the pain of the birth process. So they'll experience being surrounded by like a little kid's body and stuff externally while they're absorbed in eternal Goloka activities. But the death part they don't actually experience. It's just an immediate transition for them, basically. Because they're not dealing with karma anymore. They're not dealing with karmic reactions or a calculation of ratio of things that they did devotionally or otherwise, whereas those who are conditioned souls are dealing with that stuff. Where basically at the time of death you'll have a ratio that you're interacting, and if the ratio is predominantly in the direction of devotion to Krishna purity, etc., you can make it to the spiritual world Goloka from that standpoint. But if someone's already a pure devotee, they don't go through that part of the process. Because that part of the process actually has to do very much so with Yamaraja and his devotion to Krishna, basically one of his services to Krishna, basically his last service in relationship to living entity's last bodily state before you go back to Goloka, things like that. So yeah, I would love a full discussion from you with you about death and fear of death. Yeah, we'll actually have a direct discussion about that very soon, and well, that's going to be a good video topic, actually, a very good video topic, because that's going to be related to why the pure devotees aren't afraid of death. It's because what they're experiencing 24/7, what they're seeing, or I should say who they're seeing the pastimes of Radha and Krishna continually, like literally so, real time. So the external state for them is 100% external and completely illusory, as in it's not actually taking place for them at all. Whereas the individuals who are conditioned to some degree or another, they're experiencing an externalized state to one degree or another, and that's why they experience the pain of death, etc., and fear of death, all these different things. It's not so much a fear of death; it's more a fear. It's more a fear of the pain of death and the fear of transitioning and being trapped in another body for a long period of time to then be able to finally escape the womb. That's more the fear for people who are Krishna devotees. It's not so much the fear of actually dying; it's the fear of the pain of dying that people are afraid of, because it is painful in those cases. So. And you say everyone is scared of death, including me. I think people will be fascinated by a truthful, open discussion about it. Yeah. And as devotees, we're more a fear of the actual pain sensation of death, because we know we're going to continue on after death. It's not the death itself that's the fear. It's more so, okay, what state are we going to attain after death? That's the fear. And what about the pain of going through death? That's the fear. And will I forget Krishna at the time of death is the fear. In the minds of most devotees. Whereas in most materialists and just foolish people in general, they're actually afraid of death as a whole, because they literally have no solid idea what's actually going to take place with death. They basically just have a bunch of theories and speculations, but they don't have any solid, okay, this is what's going to take place, all this stuff. So, yeah, and that's the thing. So, as devotees, we have to transcend being afraid of death. Like I said, as devotees, we're not afraid of death itself, but many are afraid of the pain of death. So yeah, I'm not afraid of death either. I'm actually looking forward to leaving this temporal state. But of course, naturally, that's a helpful thing if one is engaged in Kshatriya Varna activities or training them and stuff. You start to become immune to the fear of the pain of death also, because you're more than likely going to be stabbed to death or shot or something, or a combination of things. Their body's torn apart and everything like this. So you basically have to become immune to that. The pain you're going to experience at the time of death. And this is actually referred to as a Purusha Meda. In other words, a sacrifice of the consciousness of being the supreme enjoyer. When you basically die in battle for Krishna's pleasure, that can take you to Goloka Vrindavana in the transcendental world. Because what you're doing, you're literally sacrificing your consciousness of being the enjoyer of your senses when you're doing that, if you're dying in that correct consciousness. Whereas before in the past, there were some instances where people were actually sacrificed in ritual cases and stuff. But once again, in those cases, those individuals needed to actually, and they would ascend to Goloka Vrindavana from this happening, and this practice can carried on into Europe, etc. But there had to be some legitimate, actual voluntariness on the person being sacrificed like this. So it couldn't just be where you grab somebody randomly and you forcefully kill them, and you burn their bodies or something. No, they had to actually volunteer for it. And actually, but that, once again, that process in that way isn't fit for Kali Yuga anymore, because the correct consciousness thereof is no longer present in Kali Yuga amongst the minds of individuals, etc. So death happening naturally is the way now that's proper. So either in combat or in meditation and fasting, etc., or disease or whatever, these various methods are the better way to have it happen in Kali Yuga by Radha and Krishna's direct arrangement like this. So, so the 7 false ideologies, yes, we've gone over what those are in previous videos, previous topics, fairly recently to this one actually. And so they're basically, what I was mentioning that to you for was you're referencing this person who's, because what you'll run into is pretty much Krishna consciousness now has been spread so wide and so far throughout the world that now the Krishna consciousness is diluted. The original information is now diluted and mixed with all these other different ideologies and stuff. So now people have all sorts of different ideas of what Bhakti is, what devotion to Radha and Krishna is, who they are, their forms. What they all come down to, the common ground with all these 7 false ideologies that they have in common, is every one of them has some other aspect or other factor about Radha and Krishna aside from their forms that is the highest and most important thing. That's the first thing. The second thing that they all have in common is they all, somewhere along the line, have some degree of impersonal tinge somewhere, where they do not understand or fully grasp the vastness in scope, scale, and potency, and independence of the forms of Radha and Krishna. And what they do is they'll mix the forms of Radha and Krishna with some other idea of the absolute as a concept or an itness type ideas. And it'll be very, very subtle in most cases. Because they're actually on one level engaging in bhakti somewhat, but the problem is they're engaging in bhakti which sidelines the forms of Radha and Krishna as they actually are. and which sidelines the infinite independence of the forms of Radha and Krishna, of everyone and everything that expands from them originally. So in other words, they have a subconscious ideology that the forms of Radha and Krishna are interdependent on some all energy concept, which they see as God, on some level or another, basically. And this is what we'll come across in their preaching, how they describe it. So you really have to be, all devotees need to be very educated on what to look for, what specific wordings these people will use, how they describe things, specific philosophical points, etc. So Nick, yes, I would highly recommend watch the video called Real Syncretism versus Syncretic Brahmavadi. We go into this very much in depth on the pinpoint specifics of this, how you can spot one of the 7 very quickly and immediately, and how you can defeat them in discussions, debates, etc., both with scriptural backup and without scriptural backup. Both. You can do it both ways. Because the truth is the truth. With or without scripture backing you up, the truth remains the same. So the truth about Radha and Krishna's forms being the highest, deepest truth never changes, whether or not you have scripture backing you up. So what scripture does back you up in this, but the point is the truth is still the truth, even if you don't have a scripture in front of you or a verse that you're quoting or something. But verses and quotes help your case, very much so, yes. But once again, verses and quotes, the only disadvantage to them is many times, no matter how accurate the verse or quote is, those quotes themselves and verses can be misinterpreted in so many ways. So the wording of quotes and verses and the wording of explaining things, explaining the truth, is very key as well. So today I'll wrap it up pretty soon, but I want everybody to understand the real facts of this, because we're dealing with a situation now which is just like what Bhaktisiddhanta was dealing with, where the whole devotional world at large, the Vaishnava world, there's incorrect preaching going on about Harinama Sankirtana, what Harinama Sankirtana actually is, the full value of Harinama Sankirtana. There's incorrect preaching about what celibacy actually is, the process of celibacy, the importance of celibacy. And so there's incorrect preaching going on about so many different topics, about the Radharani's actual highest position, which her position is the highest and the supreme position. And so all these different points, but now all these different points that are being inaccurately preached have now become the mainstream. So the incorrect preaching is now the mainstream preaching and is now accepted as what is devotional service, what is the Vaishnava norm, etc. So currently we're in a state where most of the Vaishnava world now accepts as a given that Harinama Sankirtan is just a process of devotion, one of the aspects of devotional service, basically an optional thing that you can just choose to opt out of any day or engage in. And so basically there's this false pride, false egoistic consciousness in the devotional world at large. The devotees can actually just optionally choose to engage in private chanting, japamala, scriptural study, etc., and that by itself will get you back to Goloka. It doesn't work that way. But this has now become the accepted norm, and it's creating a laziness consciousness in devotees worldwide. So this is very dangerous, because this lazy consciousness one thing leads to another. And I'll always say this. It always starts somewhere, and this is where it's beginning, and then that ideology, that lazy ideology, will then lead to other things, so on and so forth. And if these points are not continually clarified to people, they'll basically just take an idea and try to run with it, basically. So in my presentations, there's a very stringent process to go through to verify if something, a video or a song or lyrics, etc., are directly encoded or not to the public and for the public's benefit by the Supreme Lord. And if it's not provable, if these things aren't provable to the public, then they can be acknowledged as such, but they have to be admitted that they're not publicly provable. That's the whole point. So there's a very stringent criteria. So what a lot of people will probably attempt to do and try to do is just come up with random ideas for, okay, oh, I'm seeing encoding here, 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 all over the place that's direct. Well, yes, everything is encoded by Radha and Krishna, but they don't necessarily encode everything for everyone at the same time. They do that in certain cases, but they don't do it in every case. So the point is, this is just one of many examples, though, of things like this. So, so if people in immaturity, if they don't pay attention to all these specifics and things like this, all the key points regarding celibacy, the importance thereof, Harinama Sankirtana, etc., they will misunderstand and they'll be misguided on a lot of topics without the correct understanding and without seeing the correct goal in mind. So the main thing we must make sure does not spread in the devotional world large, either subconsciously or subtly in the preaching, etc., is we need to make sure this sexual Tantra stuff, which is Bhakti, which is a tinged form of Bhakti, does not start spreading in the preaching or the activities or the teaching. So, in other words, we need to make sure that in the preaching, illicit sex outside of producing children for the Krishna consciousness, any sex outside of that, actually, even with one's wife, is illicit sex. So, these things must be correctly preached and spread regarding these points, because if they're not, I can guarantee you, millions, hundreds of thousands of people everywhere will be misled on these points. And yes, Bhakti Yoga, devotional service to Krishna Vaishnavism, will spread like wildfire. But if those points aren't clarified, the wildfire spreading of Vaishnavism, which is happening now, is going to be tinged with all these ideas. So, currently the most popular form of what's seen as Vaishnavism now is what I refer to as syncretic Brahmavadi tinged ideologies. These have to do with people getting really in depth into like syncretism, which is a legitimate science, but mixed with all these wrong ideologies towards the forms of Radha and Krishna, etc., that are mixed up and jumbled up with all these other mysticism ideas and things like that, chakra stuff and whatnot. So because devotion to Radha and Krishna is completely transcendental altogether from all these other processes, the chakra stuff, the veganism, and all these other practices, which are actually just secondary side processes to the actual thing that's going on internally in the heart and consciousness. But what's happening with this wrong preaching is now everybody's now accepting those as the standards of what devotional service is, and you can see this, everybody's getting gradually led back into impersonalism mixed with personalism. So here's the thing. There's no such thing in reality as personalism mixed with impersonalism. That's a completely bogus idea. I say that because basically they think they're engaging in personal devotion to Radha and Krishna, but their ideology are impersonalistically tinged regarding their forms, in the sense that they don't actually acknowledge the forms of Radha and Krishna as the highest, deepest, most important truth and factor of all. They'll focus more on vibrations, sounds, they'll focus more on this other stuff that comes from Radha and Krishna's forms, rather than their forms. And that's what the false ideologies are. So impersonalism mixed with personalism is actually really just impersonalism that's gradually becoming more and more impersonal as time goes on. That's really all it is. It's basically dupes. So a person will dupe themselves to think they're a personalist, but they'll actually, as time goes on in their devotion, they'll actually become more and more impersonalistic as time goes on, rather than more personalistically devotion. Because if the forms of Radha and Krishna aren't the center and the main factor of focus, okay, as the actual highest, then naturally you're going to be led to whatever you're concocting is higher or more important than their forms, which is going to be something other than their forms, which means less personal, less formful, less face-to-face, etc. You can see where it leads, okay? So understand this very clearly, that right and left, especially with social media and things like this, I'm seeing all these pseudo-devotional ideologies pop up right and left all over the place. Yes, there you go. And see, that is genuine too, because Lakshmi and Vishnu have their set of living entities that are eternally in loving relationships with them, serving them, etc. So you really have to go with what you know to be the truth, okay? You have to go with what you feel internally in spite of what everybody else says around you, externally, etc. You must do this in your devotional service, and that will lead you actually to the correct path, but in a way that maintains the sanctity and understanding of the importance of celibacy, Harinama Sankirtana, etc., without sidelining any of these processes in terms of their importance. So, now Rama Cloud, you're mentioning, I noticed the trend of millennials doing yoga and calling themselves yogis. They take the devotion and God out and replace it with sense gratification and materialism. Even the common understanding of karma is so materialistic. Yes, actually, that is a very common trend now amongst the non-devotionally inclined crowd, but you'll also notice that, because we discussed this before, yoga actually means to unite with Radha and Krishna in intimate love and affection, or their expansions, Lakshmi and Vishnu, in affection internally. And if that's not actually happening, then it's just stretching, it's just postures, it's not yoga at all. It's just asanas, just positions, postures, stretching, etc., which stretching has nothing to do with yoga, unless Krishna is the reason why somebody is stretching. so that they're meditating on Krishna while they're stretching. So it's like if stretching is good, it helps you meditate on the form of Radha and Krishna while you're stretching. That's bhakti yoga. And that's actually yoga. But if you're meditating on having sex with women or improving your bodily health while you're stretching, that's that's Mahamaya. That's illusory. That's what it's not. That's not actually devotion at all. It's stretching. I mean, you could be at a cardio kickboxing class and call that bhakti yoga just as much as you could stretching and chanting all these mantras and stuff if your mind's not on Krishna in both activities as the center of your focus. Right. And see, there's the thing is, doing those other processes, they just simply become not 100% necessary. So if one is inclined to do them and it helps their actual sadhana to Radha and Krishna meditation on them, then there's nothing wrong with that. And they're actually hatha yoga, actually whatever the yoga is. But basically, the other yogas are only yoga to the degree that they contain bhakti yoga. So if there's no bhakti yoga involved, the other yogas aren't yogas. They're just those things themselves. So just hatha, so basically just the breathing, or just the stretching, just whatever it is, just the chakra development stuff, but not actually devotion. Now, this is very important, Robin. But this is the new trend developing. Now, this is why I keep warning devotees right and left about this syncretism thing going on, because syncretism is a real science, yes, that is established by Radha and Krishna, which is why there's the real version, then there's the false version, which is becoming popular. Now, the popular, false, diluted version is the version that a lot of these millennials are now taking up to more so than just the materialistic stretching external stuff. There's actually now a larger number of people starting to take to the chakra-based mysticism ideology stuff tinged with bhakti. So now, in many ways, it's actually worse, because now people are not only just doing the stretches and stuff, now they're actually getting wrong information about Radha and Krishna, incorrect information about their glories, the pastimes, the scope, and stuff like this. And now they're actually being taught that bhakti yoga has to do with all these different things, like specifically veganism, specifically working on your chakras, specifically celibacy is like a mechanical process to transcend the bottle, transcending the oil and all this other stuff. Yeah, those are physiological processes, but if anyone's read the Srimad Bhagavatam and the scriptures, those, at the end of the day, if bhakti to Radha and Krishna isn't actually taking place, all those processes also, even if Radha and Krishna are involved as the topic or subject matter, are still mechanical processes. Okay? They're still not devotional if the forms of Radha and Krishna are not at the center of focus. As they are. Okay? So a person could, and this is what's now being passed off as what bhakti is, and it's trailing over to actual sincere devotees, and now they're buying into a lot of these teachings, and now misunderstanding the original more sincere, more pure devotion that they had by bad association with false syncretists, etc. like this. And this is what's going on now. This is why this stuff's spreading like wildfire, because whatever is not actually fully true is always going to be the more popular thing. Always. This is always going to be the case in Kali Yuga throughout all the ages. So to the degree that something is actually more true, that much less it's popular. So think about it. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, he never ejaculated once. He strictly followed all the four regular principles his entire life, completely. Everything else. How many other devotees in the world are willing or enthusiastic to do that also? Think about it. Practically none in the world. We idealize being able to strictly follow those things, but so what Bhaktisiddhanta himself did personally was literally the least popular thing you could ever do universally ever in the history of eternity. So what Bhaktisiddhanta did personally was literally the least popular thing anyone will ever do in the vastness of eternity, because what he was doing was the most true, the most accurate, the most legitimate, and what he was teaching was the most true, most accurate, the most legitimate. That's why it's the least popular. So always pay attention to what is the most popular, and you have to sift through whatever is popular, what aspects of what is popular are still containing truth, and go further and further and pinpoint out. You have to be like a swan, pinpoint out, okay, which individuals are actually strictly following and correctly teaching amidst this mass of the sea of information. Okay, you have to seek out the pinpointed correctness amidst all this chaos and madness, because always you will find that the correct teachings will be, or the most correct teachings, because there's layers of correctness and accuracy, but the most correct will always be the most isolated, the least popular, the least discussed, least talked about, etc. So somebody may, technically speaking, be actually preaching the full truth, but they may not be practicing in practical reality. And so the ones who are preaching the full truth and actually practicing will be even more popular than the ones preaching and not practicing. So the stuff I say and do is going to be more popular than the stuff because it's less accurate, right? What I'm saying, I may be teaching the full truth, but I'm not actually practicing fully celibacy yet, etc. So therefore, somebody who says the same stuff I do and actually practices more accurately, that person is going to be less overall popular in a genuine sense, simply because they're more strictly following things. So pay attention to where, to pay strong attention to where there is severe lack of popularity regarding somebody teaching things about devotional service, things like this. All glories to you, Robin Cloud. Thank you, my friend, for taking part in this. Yep, have a good one, Nick. So, yeah, I took this a little longer than expected, but I'll wrap it up soon. But the last points I wanted to get out in this were that the glories of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, this is a very important topic. So the chanting of Nittaya Gauranga is, for the purpose of pleasing them and devotion to them, is very essential. So when we're chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, we should be doing so specifically for the pleasure of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya as the reason we're chanting the Maha Mantra, and then glorifying them in this process. Oh, great, Nick. So you'll be around for the last few minutes of this. So it's very important that devotees understand that the chanting of Nittaya Gauranga, so the names of Nityananda and Lord Gauranga, which are literally Balarama and Krishna themselves, in a unique set of pastimes eternally in Goloka, are just as important as the glories of Radha and Krishna and the glories of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as well. This is true. Although the ratio of our days we spend chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in particular, because the Maha Mantra, this is what they gave us to chant and what they want us to actually do. And this is their desire for the world, to spread the glories of Radha and Krishna throughout the world. And different living entities, depending on their eternal preferences, some prefer to be specifically pinpointed in Radha Krishna pastimes, or Lakshmi and Vishnu pastimes as an expansion of that, and others desire more to be specifically immersed in Nityananda and Gauranga's pastimes, Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And some devotees actually specifically desire to be in both simultaneously, eternally, at the same time. This is actually my particular type desire. I tend to lean a little bit more towards the Vrindavana stuff, but not by a whole lot. They're pretty much balanced for me. And the devotees in our sampradaya, we are taught that, and most of the people that come to this this line of teaching amongst us are individuals inclined towards both sets of pastimes. So Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda's pastimes, along with Radha and Krishna's pastimes, together, simultaneously, is our interest. Okay, and so, and this is why the chanting and glorification of both is very essential and important, actually, without sidelining either or in every case. So, okay, yep, I myself have to roll out soon as well, and time flies so fast. But thank you, my friend Nick, for sticking around, and Robin and everyone else for taking part in this discussion. I will see you next week. The day, I may shift it to a different day instead of Fridays, but yeah, we'll go into some more in-depth territory regarding this point. And I actually will go, because people have been wanting more specifics on this. So what we'll start doing is we'll actually start going really in-depth into, oh, you're welcome, my friend, Fajalar Thurneman. Okay, cool. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Yeah, we'll go really in depth on this and these topics, so that, because all devotees worldwide need to know, because this is the big thing right now that is spreading like wildfire. You need to know what correct, real syncretism is, which is actually devotion to Radha and Krishna, versus false syncretism, which teaches incorrect teachings about Radha and Krishna. Now, I've discussed this before, but we're going to go really, really in depth into this. Further in depth than I've ever gone before on this topic. And this is going to be the, what would you call it, the linchpin and the central pivot point of what that will make or break your ability to engage in Harinama Sankirtan and actually spread Krishna consciousness wherever you're at and all around you, or not. Okay? Because the popular thing is, or the more popular thing is always going to be the least correct thing. That's how Kali Yuga works. That's actually how the material world works. So, and how the material world has always worked, actually. So, because this is the world of what? That which is not illusory. So therefore, being the illusory world, the things that are more true are going to require more actual seeking and more in depth. So to put it quite simply, just remember, don't ever buy into or be inclined towards any impersonalistic ideology at all, or tinges whatsoever. And if you come across them and see them anywhere in any capacity, immediately you can simply know that they're not true, or they're false, or they're leading in the wrong direction. If they're leading you anywhere other than the forms of Radha and Krishna, which is inclusive of the forms of Lakshmi and Vishnu, yes, because those are their expansions. So anything other than the forms of Radha and Krishna and their direct expansions, their formful expansions, anything else that leads you away from those as being the center of your focus as a devotee, is, you can 100% guarantee immediately, an impersonalistically tinged ideology. Okay? So, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to all the previous acharyas, and all glories to Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. May we all unite together and spread Harinama Sankirtana and Krishna consciousness as it is throughout the entire world. Hare Krishna.